Hey guys, in this video, we're gonna do a start to finish edit using the Pro panel. So first we need to take the images in Lightroom, the raw photos, do some raw processing, and then get them ready to do the blending and editing in Photoshop using the panel. All right, so these are the two images that we'll be working with here. So these are two long exposures at a very popular waterfall in Iceland. So you can see this one here is a little bit overexposed, and then this one is going to be a little bit underexposed. So when I say overexposed, I mean for the sky, because obviously the shadows here are pretty dark and we're going to need to do some adjustments to brighten that. But you can see in this photo here, the highlights are not blown out, and we're going to be able to blend these highlights back in with this exposure here so that we have a properly blended photo. So first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to get the photos to look pretty close in appearance together. And this is generally what I'm doing when I'm doing any type of blending with luminosity masks. I want to get the images to appear about the same exposure and balanced. And this is going to help when you're blending in the highlights, for example, into an area wherever they meet at the edges with shadows, for example. This transition is going to be a lot smoother if the images are more similar in appearance. So first things first, I want to brighten this guy up, and I want to bring the shadows up just a touch. I don't usually go too crazy with the shadows because it can start to look a little bit unnatural. But I am going to bring the highlights down, and I also don't go all the way down with the highlights too because it can make things look unnatural, and we're going to blend the highlights back in. So I won't go all the way down, but I want to get them a lot less bright, so something like this looks good to me. And then for this image here, I'm going to brighten the crap out of it, but I'm going to show you why in a second, because we can retain all these highlights here, you see, because they weren't blown out. So what we want to do is bring the shadows and the exposure up to get this, again, close in appearance to the other image. The thing is, if we zoom into the shadows on this underexposed image, because we did such a drastic exposure change, you can see a ton of noise in the shadows. So this is going to be a problem for the shadows, but you can see in the highlights that it's very clean. So the thing is when we do our blending, we're only going to blend those highlights back in from this underexposed shot, so the shadow noise isn't going to be an issue. All right, so these look pretty similar in exposure here. Lastly, I would just select both and then make sure that my profile corrections are on. So I want to make sure that any type of vignette or lens corrections are applied, and sometimes I'll turn off the distortion correction, but it did correct for a little bit of vignetting, so I'm happy with that. One thing to keep in mind, guys, when you are doing the profile corrections, make sure that it's applied to the two images you're blending, or the multiple images that you're blending together, the same way. So I have the distortion turned off on both. For example, if I did not turn the distortion off on one of the images but not the second one, then you can see there's going to be a difference in the appearance, and it's going to affect our blending. So make sure that they look pretty similar in appearance, guys, and you have them matching so that when you go to blend, they line up perfectly. All right, so lastly, we could do some color adjustments. This image does have a bit of a warm color cast, but I might make some adjustments for that once we get into Photoshop, so I'm not too concerned right now. And again, we're probably going to blend back this whole sky or a lot of the highlights from this one, so I'm not going to do anything really with coloring or anything like that as well until we get into Photoshop. So once we're happy with our raw adjustments, and again, I keep this super basic, guys, I don't do sharpening or anything like that, noise reduction, I do that all in Photoshop. I'm going to right click and then open these guys up in Photoshop as layers. And if you're opening them up from Bridge, for example, it's just going to be a similar process. You'll just go up to Tools and then Photoshop and then open as layers. Alright guys, so this is a tutorial for the panel, so just keep that in mind. If you have the panel, just follow along with each step. So first up, I'm going to go ahead and do my blending. So you can put your bright exposure on the top or the bottom. It's really up to you. It's just your personal preference, but I like to just keep my bright exposure on the top and create a layer mask. And then this way I can just paint out the selection that I'm about to make and reveal the layer from underneath it. Alright, so first I need to make a bright selection, so I'm going to select maybe 2. And I don't want this to be super broad to where I'm affecting highlights in the whole image, but I do want it to not also be too constricted, because I do want to include some extra stuff around the edges of the blown out highlights to make this blend very seamless. So you can see in black what's going to be concealed, and with white what's going to be revealed. So this is just our luminosity mask preview here. So far 2 looks like a really good candidate. So I'm going to select this one here. I'm gonna load it as a selection. And then now I'm gonna select my layer mask again, and with a black brush set to 100% opacity and 100% flow. And if you guys didn't know, you can use the numbers on your keyboard for opacity. Just the regular number will be the opacity, and shift and the number is gonna affect your flow. So I'm gonna paint with a soft brush at 100% flow and opacity, and I'm gonna paint within this selection that I just made of the highlights. And because I'm gonna paint within the selection here, it's not gonna affect anything outside of that selection, which in this case would be the midtones and the shadows. All right, so I'm gonna zoom in just a little bit, and I'm gonna make my brush a little bit bigger, and I'm just gonna start painting in this selection that we made of the highlights here, and you can see it's bringing back the highlights from the layer underneath it. And you can hide the panel if you want. You can also hide the ants on the panel just by holding down Shift, hovering over this here till you see minus plus ants, and clicking that. I like to have the ants visible so I can really make sure that I'm painting in the right areas. But if you're making a very broad painting like this, you can just turn that off. And the benefit of that would be so that you can see what you're doing as you're painting. So I'm just gonna deselect now because I've painted everything that I need. But you can see now we have a perfectly blended in transition here. There's no type of errors from the mask or anything. It's just completely seamless and blended very precisely and smoothly. So if I turn this layer mask off and on, you can see we've literally only basically blended in the sky from underneath this image using the luminosity mask here. So the benefit of doing this with the layer masks using luminosity masks is you can see that we've only blended the image in very selectively where we wanted it. So I've just painted the sky back in, and actually because my brush is so big, I actually wound up painting some of the waterfall back in, which I didn't want to do. So this is handy to be able to hide and show your mask either as a preview or after you've already actually painted on the mask. And in this case, I just need to flip my brush using X on the keyboard. I can toggle between black and white, and I'm going to paint with white over these areas that I didn't want to reveal through the mask. And I'm just going to be very careful to not go up to the edge here. And if I did go up to the edge, I would need to reselect, so I make sure it's very precise. But I'm happy with that. And the reason why I just painted that waterfall out is because basically I wanted some of these highlights here in the waterfall. I didn't want to bring in the underexposed highlights from that. So that looks good the way it is from the overexposed shot. And then now you can see we've just blended in the highlights from the underexposed shot seamlessly with our overexposed shot, and we can start to make adjustments to these either separately, or we can merge visible and start editing them as one image. So what I'm going to do at this point is I'm going to stamp visible, so stamp up here, and I'm going to start to do cleanup. So I like to work non-destructively, so I keep my layers underneath, and periodically I just stamp visible and keep working upwards so that I have all my original layers underneath. But you can always just flatten your image as well. If you just want to save space for the file, you can just flatten instead of stamping visible as you go and just keep flattening the image. But I like to stamp visible because I'm a lunatic and I like to keep my full PSD or PSB files afterwards with all the layers. So the first thing that I want to do is clean up this sensor dust here. So I'm just going to go to filters and then sensor dust, and it's going to make this black and white preview layer for us to basically use as a map to find the sensor dust. And then I'm going to go to my spot healing brush here, and I'm just going to zoom in a bit. And when you're doing this, you don't want to paint on the sensor dust layer, you want to paint on the layer underneath. Again, this is just a map for the sensor dust. And you're just going to paint over this with your spot healing brush like so. And I have my brush set to 100% hardness, and then it's set to content aware. So I'll paint over these spots like so, and you want to turn this off as you go just to make sure you're not causing any type of weird issues in the image. So I can see I just caused something weird here, so let me just grab my patch tool, and I'm just gonna drag over here, and I just took care of that issue now. So that's good. And then going up here, you can see we got rid of that sensor dust and there's no type of weird issues. So I'm gonna turn this map back on here, and basically you just need to keep track of where you've already removed it from and then keep moving through the image. So I'm gonna go back to my spot healing brush here. If I turn that off, you can see we got rid of the dust and nothing funny is on the screen, so I'm happy. And I can see something else up there I need to get rid of. All right, so we got rid of the sensor dust. I'm just gonna delete that layer now. And you can always run that a second time just to double check if you want to make sure that you got all the dust. All right, so there's also some people here, so let's go ahead and zoom in, and we'll do the same thing for this guy here. I'm just gonna use my spot heal set to content aware, and I'm just gonna paint right over the area that I want to get rid of, and boom, it's gone. So you can also use the fill tool for this, so I'm gonna show you real quick. I'll just undo that. So you can also try the fill tool, guys, and just use something like the lasso or some type of selection, and basically just make your selection here, and then under tools, all you need to do is click shift on the fill with, and you'll see content, and then it pops up with this box here, and then hit enter or click OK, and that will fill in the area with content that looks similar. So if I deselect, then you can see it's just filled in that area with similar looking content. So now I need to go up and get rid of some of these weird shadows from people wandering through the picture. So again, just shift click on fill with, and you'll see content, and that's gonna fill whatever you have selected in with content that looks similar. And it might take a couple of times, but you can see now that we've gotten rid of these weird shadows from people wandering through the long exposure. And that looks good. So now that we've gotten rid of the people, we've gotten rid of the sensor dust. I'm gonna look for any other type of distractions in the image, whether that's hot pixels or trash or anything like that. And I can see some hot pixels here in the foreground. So I'll go ahead and get rid of those real quick. And if you don't know, hot pixels are just a result of the sensor getting too hot from doing a super long exposure. So you can get rid of them the same way with a spot heal brush, just like so. But basically, it's just a problem sometimes with sensors when you're doing a lot of long exposures, but easily correctable. All right, so we look good. I'm gonna hit Command 0 to go back zoomed out. And then I'm gonna start making some adjustments to this image. So maybe I wanna make some adjustments to the color in the sky. I could do that with luminosity masks, or I could also do this with color masks. In this case, I wanna try and use a luminosity mask, so I'm gonna make a selection maybe with, let's try 1. Let's do 1, but then we're gonna refine this. So I clicked refine with a lights 1 luminosity mask preview. And I'm just gonna kind of target more towards the sky here, just by excluding shadows and including more of the highlights and the midtones. So something like this would work really well. I'm gonna click OK. And then I can get rid of this waterfall very quickly by just selecting this, and also maybe, I'll leave the water selected because I wanna affect the watercolor as well, but I don't wanna affect the color in this waterfall. So in this case, all I need to do is select that water real quick. I'm still on the luminosity mask preview, and I just click fill with, and it's set to foreground color by default, but I want background because black is in the background right now. And I'll click OK, and that's gonna fill that in with black. So if I deselect that, I have my luminosity mask preview right now. I'm just gonna output this as a color balance layer. And you can see that we just created this layer mask on a color balance layer that was created from the luminosity selection that we had. And basically, whatever I do now to this color balance is only gonna be revealed where it's white. So this is great because I basically made a very targeted selection of the sky with that luminosity mask, and now I can adjust the colors in this color balance layer, and it's really only gonna be shown through that mask, which is mostly just the sky. So I can make this just a little bit more red in the midtones, for example, or a little bit more red in the highlights, or I can make it warmer as well, or I can add a little bit of magenta. And you don't want to go too overboard with this, guys, but this is just a quick example how we can do some shifts in colors. So that's a little too strong. So I'm just going to drop the opacity just a touch, and I think that looks pretty good. So maybe I want to brighten up the shadows here in this area a little. So I'm going to make a darks mask. Something like 4 is going to be a little bit more restricted, so you can see white is where we're affecting, or where we're going to affect or reveal. So 3 is a little too broad. It's selecting a ton of the shadows in the foreground here. So I'm gonna go maybe more like something like 4. And then I'm gonna actually apply this as a group and mask. So when you group and mask, you create a mask on a group with the luminosity mask that you just had selected. So now whatever type of effects or adjustments I put in this group will only be revealed through that layer mask. So now if I make a curves layer, for example, here, I can just brighten up the curves and it's only gonna be shown through the shadows. And then further, I can actually just invert this. So I click invert and then it's gonna invert the layer mask. And then now I can paint that effect in just where I want it using a white brush. So if I paint over here, for example, then it doesn't affect the whole image, it's only affecting it where I painted. And that's very strong, so I'm actually gonna turn this down a little. And I just really wanted to brighten the shadows up just a little bit in this image. So something like that looks good. And then if I wanted to, I could even paint maybe slightly lower opacity. Let's drop the flow down to 30 and we'll keep it at 100, and I'll just dab here and dab here and dab here. And again, this is only being revealed through the shadows through this layer mask on our group. All right, so I'm happy with this now. At this point, I want to apply some filters. All right, so first I'm going to apply dark highlights. Dark highlights is going to find the highlights in the image, and it's just going to darken them slightly, which will bring back a little bit more detail and color. So that might be a little too strong for our taste, so I'll just turn that down a little bit. And if I click on show, then I can see the layer mask. And again, I'm not really trying to affect the waterfall here, so I'm just going to paint that out at 100% flow, 100% opacity. That looks good. And actually I'm going to paint it out of there as well. All right, so I'm going to hide that. Going back to the filters here, next up I'm going to use Lux. So Lux always adds a nice pop to my images. It's a very nice, quick way to add some brightness and contrast. And then I want to add my Orton and high pass sharpening. So I just use the Orton Sharp in this case. You can do those individually as well. But when you do Orton Sharp, first up it's going to give you your blur dialog box here. So I always use 60, so I just click that OK. And then it's going to allow you to make adjustments to the curves level if you want, but this is how it looks by default. And this is how about the settings that I typically use. So I actually think it looks a little too dark in this case, so I can just shift the blacks over just a touch, and then it's going to be not as dark. So I'm going to click OK, and then the high pass sharpening dialog box comes up. I always have this set to 2.8, so I'm just going to click that OK as well. And now if I turn that off and on, you can see we have a nice dreamy glow that we've created, but we've also retained that sharpness as well and the details in the image. So if you think that either of those are too strong, you can always just turn down these layers individually. So I'm going to turn down the Orton a little bit to have it not as blurry. And the sharpening, I'll usually zoom in to see what I'm doing pretty clearly here. You can see the sharpening is pretty strong, but it's not too strong. Maybe it's just a little strong. I'll just take it down to, let's do 65. And I'm going to zoom back out. And so far, this is our before and after. So this is our overexposed shot. And we brought back in the details, did some color adjustments as well as some cleanup. And at this point, I'm gonna add a custom vignette. So I like to use the custom vignette. You can also just do a standard vignette and it's gonna be your typical oval shaped here. And you can turn the strength down on that if you think it's too strong. But I actually want to do a custom vignette in this case here. And I'm just gonna draw just around this area here, and I'm going to exclude the water, and then I'm just going to click custom vignette, and it's going to create a nice custom shape vignette based off that selection. And I'm going to turn the strength down just a touch. Just want to make this kind of subtle. And I'm going to show you guys a quick trick actually that you can use to make kind of some nice glow in your image. So like, let's say I want to add some nice glow to the area here where the sun is. I'm actually going to draw over here where it's warm, where the sun would be. And I'm going to click Custom Vignette. And then now I'm going to invert the layer mask. So just click Invert. And I'm going to double click on this box here, and I'm going to change the color to orange. Or you can alternatively select the actual color in your image so it matches as well. So now if I turn that off and on, you can see I just added some glow in this top left corner, and that's just a little bit strong, so I would dial that back. And you can also change the blend mode of that as well if you wanted to. So maybe we want to do screen. So screen really makes that glow really strong. So that is maybe just a little too strong. You can also use your transform tool and reposition this as well. So I'm gonna have it maybe somewhere like this. Something kind of cool if you wanna, get creative. Maybe I'll actually drag that underneath my vignette layer so that the darkening is above that, so that it ties it in with the vignette. All right, so periodically, like I mentioned, I stamp visible, so just click stamp up as you go. And we could get creative at this point. If I use fall foliage, for example, we could turn the greens to red in the image. So maybe I think that looks too strong. I could dial this back a little bit. And then now it goes from a summer image to a fall image. And you can see it affected the sky a little bit as well. So all we would do is select that layer mask and then, paint it out of the sky basically with black. But I'm not going to use fall foliage on this example here. I might use enhanced foliage. So enhanced foliage just enhances the actual foliage in the image at the color that it already is. So that looks a little strong, but I'm just going to maybe do about 35%, and that looks good there. So at this point, I'm pretty happy with the image. We've already done sharpening, as I mentioned. This is this high pass sharpening, which I really love to do. It really makes prints and images for social media really pop. But I do maybe want to do a little bit of noise reduction. So I'm going to select the layer, the actual layer here that I want to create the noise reduction from. And I'm just going to click noise reduction. And these are the default settings here, and you can change them if you want to. But if you're happy with it, you can just click enter or hit OK, and it's going to do its thing. So if I zoom in now and I turn this noise reduction off and on, you can see that it took care of some of that noise for us. So noise reduction does equal loss in detail. So generally what I will do is I will just selectively paint that noise reduction in. So in this case, I want to really just paint it in mostly in the sky and then in the water as well, because this is kind of the areas that will be a little bit more noise prone. So in this case, all I need to do is click invert and then make a selection for the sky. So we could do this quickly just with the quick selection and then just draw along here. And now we've made a very quick selection of our sky. And then all we need to do is select our brush by hitting B on the keyboard. And we're just going to paint this layer in on the inverted mask, which is black, with a white brush. So if I hit backslash on the keyboard, you can see in red basically where you're painting. So now I can see that because we made that selection, we're only painting in the sky here. So I just made a very quick selection of the sky and painted the noise reduction in just in the sky. So I'm going to hit backslash again. I'm going to click deselect. And then now I'm going to zoom in and I'm going to do that just in the water here. So again, if I paint and then I click, let me zoom in a little bit further here so you can see. So you can see when I paint that noise reduction in, it really does make it just look a little bit cleaner. But you want to avoid areas of high detail like these rocks here, for example. So you can do this a little bit more selectively. Again, this is supposed to be somewhat of a quick demonstration, so I'm not going to go crazy with this, but take your time with this kind of stuff and then hit the backslash key to see where you're painting as well. And you can just switch back and forth from that to see what you're doing. And images like this shot in the day aren't going to have as much noise as night images and high ISO images as well, but you might still want to do it if you're OCD like me and you want to make sure that it's in its best possible form. Then you might still want to do some noise reduction if you see a little bit of noise in your image. One thing to consider too is that the sharpening did add back some noise. So you could actually make a layer mask, or actually the sharpening comes with a layer mask on it. You can just paint that out of the areas that you don't want sharpened using the layer mask. So for example, we could have just painted the sharpening effect out of the sky and out of the water, because when you sharpen, you do introduce a little bit of extra grain and noise into the photo. And again, I'm moving really quick, guys. So take your time with this. Make sure that you're not making something look worse than it already looks with a little bit of noise. And over here, probably could use a little noise reduction too. And I'm okay with that in the noise reduction back here in the background. You do lose a little bit of detail, but I wouldn't expect the background to be super sharp. All right, so zooming back out now, I can check my before and after by holding down Option and clicking on the eye here. I'm going to reveal only that layer. You can see this is what we wound up with here. All right, so maybe we want to add a little bit more coloring or color correction to this image. A lot of times I'll use this auto tone and auto color just to see what it gives me. So let's see what auto tone did. So this was very strong, but it basically just corrected the tones and the image to be more balanced. So you can see that it did correct a little bit of a color cast. So maybe I would keep that, but adjust this only to be at like 20%. And I'll try auto color as well. And auto color did some color correction in the image, but it's a little strong as well. So maybe something like 15. And if I group these two together now and turn that off and on, you can see that it actually does look a little bit more accurate. So in this case, I would just leave that on. So if we want to further color grade this, we could go over here to Effects, under Color Effects, and then do some selective coloring. I really like to use this gradient map here. So the way that you do this is you just want to select your layer and then use your eyedropper tool and just sample some colors in the image. So I'll sample this kind of like orange, magenta area here. And then I want to hit X to switch from my foreground to background color. And then I'm going to select something like this blue over here. So now that I've had these two colors selected, all I need to do is click on gradient mask. So I'm just going to make this on the top above my layers. But basically this gradient map is going to use those colors, create a gradient map, and set it to soft light blend mode. And if I turn this off and on, you can see it just adds a really nice color grade to the image pretty instantly. And it just kind of more evenly distributes the prominent colors in the image so that you have this really nice kind of unified tone. So if you think it's too strong, you can always drop the opacity. You can also click reverse and see what that looks like. Sometimes it works, sometimes it looks worse. In this case, I'm going to not reverse it, but I'm just going to turn the opacity down a little bit. And the sky looks still a little bit bright to my eye, so maybe I might add another vignette. If you want to add the vignette like so, but it darkens the foreground, all you need to do is hold down Shift and click on your mask here to create an inverted mask. So Shift, click on the mask tool, and that just hid the layer, so now you can't see it. And wherever you paint with white, it's going to be revealed. So what I like to do is use my gradient tool here, and I'll set this to something like 50%, so I'll just hit 5 on the keyboard. And I'll have this set from foreground to transparent. This is major key here. And this way, all I do is hold down Shift and drag from the top down to the bottom, or somewhere in the middle actually. And now I'm just going to selectively reveal that vignette layer just on the top. So if I turn that off and on, now I'm just only darkening the top here, and it looks just a little bit more balanced. All right, so maybe some finishing touches. I always check with the Lux filter one more time, and that's really strong, so maybe turn that down a little, but something like that looks good. And you can see this is where we started, and then this is where we wound up. So I'm happy with this image here. Now all I need to do is go over here to my Finish tab, and if I wanted to add a watermark, for example, I can select my anchor point and then select my watermark. I have this preloaded here. Just double click here to load or select your watermark, and then just click apply, and it's going to put your watermark there. And if you want to move it, all you need to do is click your transform tool here, and then you can just move it somewhere else in the image, or you can use your arrows as well. So put it where you want, click enter, and you have your watermark there. So this would be if you're saving for web. Obviously, you're probably not saving for print with your watermark there. So I'm just going to go ahead and turn that off, or the visibility off. And if I want to save this for print, then I would probably change the color space to sRGB first, because right now it's going to be Adobe RGB. So you can see that the source profile is the original color profile of the camera. So if I want to change this to sRGB, all I need to do is click sRGB. And now the color space for the picture is sRGB. And then I would just select my folder here that I want to add these pictures to. So maybe prints, if I'm saving this for print, click open. And then now I would just name this here. And then just click JPEG if you want to save it as a full resolution JPEG. And you can click PSD to save it as a PSD file with layers, or a PSB to save it as a Photoshop document with layers. And if you save it for JPEG, this is literally ready for print, guys. This is going to have your color profile embedded, and it's going to be at 100% quality, so a maximum resolution and maximum file size too, so keep that in mind. So if you want to save this for web, then you just want to change your dimensions here. So 2048 is generally pretty good for web on the long end. So whatever size you put in this box is going to be the long end. So if you have a vertical photo, for example, shot in portrait orientation, then this is going to be the dimensions of it from top to bottom, so tall. Now if you have landscape, then the photo's dimensions will be left to right or horizontal. So then I have mine set to 100% quality usually. And for the sharpening, I don't usually apply this because I do the high pass sharpening, but experiment with this if you want to. Light sharpening could still work in this scenario. So you could just click light and then click JPEG, and this would save it for web into whatever folder you have selected up here. So one thing to consider is that this is very intelligent sharpening. It actually masks out the edges in the process of saving, so you don't wind up with any unwanted halos or anything like that. So just for example, real quick, I'll show you. This is without sharpening, so I'll put no sharp. And now I'm going to apply just some medium sharpening to show you the difference here. So we'll put medium sharp, and I'll save that there. And now if I go to that folder that I just saved those two guys, I'll show you the difference between the two. So this is going to be the image saved for web with no sharpening, and then this is going to be with medium sharpening. So there is a noticeable effect, and you can see that medium is going to be a little bit stronger than light too. But this is helpful to maintain some of that detail when you post on the internet, like on Facebook or Instagram or something like that. This can definitely help. And you can see that basically because it masks out the edges, there's no type of halos or anything from the sharpening as well. And that's pretty much it as far as the edit goes, guys. If I go back to Lightroom here and I select the original overexposed shot here and then click reset, and I open that in Photoshop and then drag that over here to our edit, you can see that we have taken this original file here with the blown out sky and created something really nice and properly balanced and beautiful from blending a couple images and making some corrections. So that's pretty much it as far as my kind of basic standard workflow goes, guys. Obviously, this is going to vary from image to image, especially between sunsets and astro, for example. But definitely let me know if you have any questions at all about these processes and techniques, and let me know if you have any questions about the panel as well.